Welcome to the deep dive. So if you've ever felt, just overwhelmed by this constant push for perfection, maybe in work, maybe your own goals, maybe even just scrolling through your phone, you might be looking for answers in, maybe the wrong place. Today, we're going to step back from all that usual self-help talk. We're diving into something different, a really rich set of traditional Japanese ideas all about well-being and genuine contentment.
That's right. We've basically distilled the core wisdom from, quite a bit of material, focusing on how to build a genuinely fulfilling life. We're aiming to get straight to the heart of it, giving you the actionable concepts, things like Ikigai, wabi-sabi, and shinrinyoku. So this isn't about quick fixes, it's more like a fundamental shift in how you approach things day to day.
Yeah, and what jumps out right away is how holistic it all feels. It's not just like thinking nice thoughts. The whole approach is kind of split into these two connected parts. The mind, which they call kokoro, and the body, karada. And the idea is you really can't find that inner peace unless you get both working together.
Exactly. It really speaks to this idea that contentment is something you do, you practice it. It's not just a feeling you arrive at. You kind of need those physical habits to back up the mental shift.
Okay, so let's start with the mind then, the kokoro. Because the first big lesson feels, honestly pretty counterintuitive for modern life. Embrace imperfection. This is that wabi-sabi idea, right?
Right. And wabi-sabi,
yeah,
it often gets simplified. People think it just means accepting things that aren't great. But it's much more profound than that. It's really about finding this deep, almost unique beauty in things that are incomplete or temporary or, not perfectly symmetrical.
Okay, but give me a real example. How can I, living in a busy city, actually practice wabi-sabi today? Because let's be honest, doesn't accepting imperfection sometimes just sound like an excuse, like for cutting corners or just being lazy?
That's a fair question. But wabi-sabi is more about active observation, not just resignation. Think about, say, the mug you use for coffee or tea. If it's mass-produced, right, the goal is zero flaws, perfect symmetry. But if it's handmade, or maybe it's an old one that got chipped and then repaired beautifully, like with that gold technique, kintsugi.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that.
Right, then it's history, its flaws. They actually become the source of its character, its value.
Yeah.
So practicing wabi-sabi might mean consciously appreciating, say, the way your favorite old jumper has faded a bit, or the patina on an old wooden table. It's basically deciding not to spend energy chasing some impossible, sterile kind of perfection in everything around you, or even in yourself, and that immediate drop in stress. That's the benefit right there.
That really reframes stress, doesn't it? If you stop trying to control every little thing, like, getting older or that chipped mug, you actually free up a lot of mental energy.
Exactly right. And that freed up energy, that mental bandwidth, it leads us perfectly into the second lesson for the mind. Live with purpose. This is the search for your Ikigai.
Okay, Ikigai. We hear that word thrown around a lot now. Usually just means your reason to get up in the morning or something like that. But the sources we looked at, they give it a much more structured feel, don't they? Almost like a formula.
They really do. The definition of Ikigai only really clicks when you understand the four pieces that have to overlap. It's that sweet spot, right, where four things meet. What you love doing, what you're actually good at, what the world needs from you, and crucially, what you can get paid for.
Huh. So if you're missing even one of those, you're not quite in your Ikigai zone.
That's the critical point. Yeah. For example, say you've got passion and a sense of mission, but no profession. You love it, the world needs it, but you can't make a living. You might feel great, but, broke. Or maybe you have a profession and a vocation, you're good at it, you get paid, but there's no real passion. You might be comfortable, but maybe feel kind of empty inside. So the search isn't just finding something you enjoy, it's about aligning service, skill, income, and love. And that takes real ongoing self-reflection to keep it balanced.
Okay, so if wabi-sabi is like accepting things as they are, and Ikigai is figuring out your direction, the sources seem to add a third piece to hold it all together for the mind. Cultivate gratitude.
Oh, absolutely. This is huge. You really can't overstate gratitude. It's like the muscle that lets you actually feel the benefits of wabi-sabi. If you don't actively notice and appreciate the simple, maybe fleeting good things in your day, that hot shower, the taste of your coffee, a quiet sunset moment, then just accepting imperfection philosophically doesn't really land. It doesn't feel rewarding.
So how do you go beyond just like saying thanks sometimes to actually cultivating gratitude as a real practice?
Well, the sources really emphasize small daily rituals. It's about consciously taking stock. Maybe literally writing down, say, 3 small things that brought you a bit of joy that day, and doing it consistently. By sort of forcing your brain to look for and register the positive stuff, however small, you start rewiring yourself away from always focusing on what's missing or flawed, which ties straight back into wabi-sabi, right? Appreciating the moment just as it is. It shifts your focus from chasing the next big thing to really valuing the small things you already have.
Right. It sounds like a lot of the mind work, the kokoro, is really about acceptance, accepting flaws, accepting the process, accepting the present. But acceptance alone can be tough if your actual physical life feels chaotic or draining. So how do the sources say we support these ideas physically?
Exactly. The mind needs the body on board. And this brings us nicely to the carrot part, the practical physical stuff. And probably the most famous one, maybe the easiest to access for most people, is connect with nature.
Ah, you mean shinrinyoku,
Yeah.
forest bathing. What's involved there that's different from just, going for a hike?
Right, shinrinyoku.
Yeah.
It literally translates as forest bathing, and yeah, it's a recognized therapeutic practice. There's actual research behind it.
Yeah.
It's really not about how far you walk or how many calories you burn. It's much more about just immersing yourself, using your senses. The sources really emphasize slowing right down, like turn off your phone. Actually smell the air, the pine needles or damp earth. Listen to the leaves, the birds, touch the bark of a tree.
So it's really an exercise in being fully present then, focused awareness.
Yes, exactly. It's found to really calm the nervous system. The source material stresses that this is like a direct antidote to the constant buzz and stress of our modern built-up environments. It basically syncs your body's pace back to nature's pace, which physically reinforces that whole philosophical goal of slowing down and appreciating the transient moment. Sensory input is the goal, not necessarily aerobic output.
Okay, beyond nature, the sources talk about other cultural practices too, things like ikebana, the flower arranging, or the tea ceremony. Those sound fascinating, but honestly, they can feel a bit inaccessible, if you're just trying to get through a busy week.
That's a really important point. And that's where we need to pull out the actionable principle behind the specific formal activity. The real value in something like a tea ceremony or ikebana isn't necessarily becoming a master of the art form itself. It's the built-in need for ritualized focus and attention.
Ah, okay. So the takeaway isn't I need to sign up for calligraphy classes, but more like I should set aside a little time for a simple, maybe repetitive task that demands my full attention. No multitasking.
Absolutely. That's the core principle. Introduce some kind of intentional ritual into your life. It could be mindfully washing the dishes, really paying attention to the water and soap. It could be dedicating 15 minutes each evening to a quiet hobby you enjoy. Or sure, trying flower arranging if that appeals. The specific action forces you to be present, and that presence is like the practical application of wabi-sabi. It cuts through the mental clutter of trying to do 10 things at once.
That connects perfectly to what seems like the final key lesson, which kind of brings the mind and body practices together. Simplify.
Definitely. If you look at the whole picture, adopting a more minimalist approach, and not just with your stuff, but mentally too, with your commitments, it's presented as crucial for contentment. When you declutter your home, you're basically reducing the number of things yelling for your attention. That lowers stress. And it aligns perfectly with finding beauty and simplicity, right back to wabi-sabi.
Less stuff, less noise, less consumption. Hopefully more clarity.
Exactly. And when you intentionally simplify your schedule, maybe saying no to a few things, you actually create the space needed for those curative practices like forest bathing or the kokoro practices like reflecting on your Ikigai. If your life is just constantly crammed full of unnecessary things, obligations, digital noise, you just won't have the mental or physical room to appreciate those simple beauties that gratitude practice needs. Simplicity creates the environment where contentment can actually grow.
This has been wow, a really comprehensive look. So how do all these pieces, the kokoro's philosophical acceptance and the kuro's physical discipline, how do they actually come together into one sort of coherent lifestyle shift for someone today?
I think the main value is the framework itself. It gives you this structured way to think about personal growth that completely sidesteps the typical Western obsession with, frantic achievement or constant self-optimization. It teaches you mindfulness practice, but through things like ritual and sensory immersion, not just sitting on a cushion. It gives you a purpose framework, the Ikigai, that's built on genuine alignment, not just raw enthusiasm. And fundamentally, wabi-sabi gives you permission to stop chasing that impossible perfection. The end goal isn't necessarily material happiness. It's more like inner peace, nurtured by deliberate habits.
It's pretty interesting how the very feel of these philosophies, even just learning about them from the sources, feels calming. It sort of reinforces the message of peace and simplicity. Just engaging with it is an act of slowing down.
And yeah, while maybe mastering something like calligraphy is, as you said, a big commitment, and maybe not for everyone, the core, universally applicable ideas we've talked about, like really connecting with nature, consciously embracing imperfection, those are things anyone can start doing pretty much right away, wherever they are. And they seem to be the fastest way to start applying this wisdom.
That was genuinely enlightening. Okay, let's just quickly recap the 5 main takeaways we've pulled out for you, the listener, from this deep dive.
Okay, so first, embrace imperfection. That's wabi-sabi. Second, live with purpose. Finding your Ikigai by balancing those 4 elements: passion, skill, need, and income. Third, connect with nature, shinrinyoku, to really ground yourself physically. Fourth, cultivate gratitude, make it a small, consistent ritual. And finally, number 5, simplify. Cut back on the clutter, both physical and mental, to make space for peace.
Yeah, these aren't just words to know. They sound like actual disciplines to practice.
They really are.
Yeah.
And maybe, if we loop back to that idea of wabi-sabi, finding beauty in things that are incomplete, things that are changing, it brings up one last thought for you to maybe reflect on. If the deepest kind of contentment comes from appreciating the process, the journey, rather than just waiting for some perfect end result, how does that change how you look at your own long-term goals? Or those projects you have that are still unfinished? Is the joy actually in the doing, the creating, the evolving? Or are you holding out for a perfect finish line that might, well, never quite arrive? Something to explore there.
We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.